Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Network. We are talking about cybersecurity strategies, and we were just talking about priorities. And I'm going to throw it over to you, Jim. What are they? You have a unique situation there, a unique position there, where you're kind of seeing these different efforts going on across the departments and agencies. And what are the priorities that you're seeing out there? What are the priorities for Fortinet?
So, Luke, that's a very good question. And let me give you some of the priorities we have. One is one that is 6 months old, but it's not an oldie, and that's the pivot we all made to remote secure telework. And the good news is we all made it. We all got that implemented. We cut through red tape. The challenge is recognizing when we also cut corners on things like security policy. And human nature being what it is, where we are now with our field expedient patches or situation is likely to become the baseline for new normal. So figuring out especially how to secure that remote environment, the home user's environment. We certainly saw threat actors pivot to start to target that environment. So it's working with the agencies to say, so do you have a way to either isolate the workload of the employee or make sure that they don't have parallel VPNs or accessing other assets in the local environment? And yes, when they're bringing the traffic back to the network or to your cloud, are you actually able to do that deep packet inspection even when it's SSL encrypted? It's one thing to have the people on the security side say, yes, we have the capability, but talking to the network people who say, yes, we actually were able to implement it with that volume. We didn't turn it off because the latency was killing us. So that's one thing. The second thing that is a priority over the next year is helping agencies figure out how to spend smarter. This is one where I do a lot of work with state and local government who have watched their resources crater as a result of COVID. Now, the federal government has had the luxury, if you will, of being able to continue to operate and even run a deficit, unlike state and local government. But their current reality is your coming reality, because I would posit that a new Congress, another administration, regardless of the outcome of the election, is going to recognize deficits matter, and you'll be facing a fiscal climate that will make the sequestration we all lived through 10 years ago look mild. So helping you figure out A, how you can do IT in that environment, and B, how you can deliver cybersecurity in that environment, because we all know when the dollars get tight, one of the first things that you cut corners on is cybersecurity. So starting agencies to think about how to spend smarter, whether that's software-defined networking, whether it's solutions where you can continue, as Vina said, to leverage automation, whether it's RPA or on the security side. These are things that I think are worth thinking about now, rather than when you get the budget cuts and say, oh dear, how do I deal with this?
Right, and that's sort of, I'm thinking about risk, right, and sort of weighing your risk. And once you can sort of define and baseline that, you know, sort of where your risk posture is and how far you're willing to go and how much it's going to cost.
That's exactly what I say. When you can't afford to do everything, how do you set your priorities? And it's the classic, NIST risk management framework.
100%. Wanda, I would imagine that you're looking at a lot of different priorities there at the Air Force. And tell us about your priorities that you see in front of you over the next year.
Oh, I can provide a list long, but we know that we have to focus on the critical initiatives that we want to accomplish over the next year. Cybersecurity is a key enabler, and so we have to understand where we fit into the initiatives. One of the major ones, of course, is our enterprise IT as a service model. We are well on our way. We have a number of bases that have transitioned, and part of that is to ensure that we do the cybersecurity portions for our help desk, for our infrastructure modernization moving forward. We are in our risk reduction effort phase, and so we're continuing to add bases and learning as we go. We're working very closely with the industry partners in the various areas right now. Other priorities, as Venus mentioned, is zero trust. We have to crack that nut. We are now in our pilot phase. We got approved recently, along with the other services, to move out based on our concept of operations. We are standing up our environment now and going through our testing piece over the next 45 days. And then lastly, we just need a integrated model for our to improve our response to incidents and then our recovery efforts. We do an excellent job from a network standpoint. The areas that I want to focus on is when we have incidents on our weapons side and our control system side, because they're the last ones and they're segmented most times. And so when we get or not get the reports, we don't have an integrated picture of cybersecurity and where we stand. And so looking at all of that, the theme going into FY21 will be cyber accountability. We need more of that. We have to do it in every space that we're in. And so my goal is to ensure that we do that and do it smartly, while we also understand that we have a limitation on our resources.
Yeah, I would imagine that, you know, the good old days of guards, gates, and locks are gone, right? You have all these embedded systems in these aircraft and the airmen and the satellites. These aircraft are just, you know, flying data centers at this point, right? So zero trust seems like you just have to be able to have some sort of a capability like that in order to you know, secure this environment and do it in a way that is thoughtful and risk-based and mindful of the dollars, right? There's just not an infinite amount of dollars to do all these things. Chris, how about at InfoBlocks? I would imagine that there's a lot of priorities. You see a lot of priorities again across that landscape. What are you seeing out there, and what can we expect over the next few months, next year?
I think both Jim and Venus had summed up a couple of points quite well. One is you know, obviously the work from home and what is no longer new and just is normal moving forward. But Venus talked about something with respect to business driving driving security, and that's true. It's always been that way. The challenge has been the introduction of technology or business here, and security has been long tail behind it, and moving that up much closer to the event of changing your business model, you know, implementing new technologies like the Air Force is doing, and so on and so forth. You need to be able to have security be part of the initial conversation, is the key point of that. From our perspective, you know, as Jim had said, was, you know, work from home folks, and understanding that, you know, all of us or most of us are teleworking right now, even for this panel. I'm relying upon a Soho router, you know, that's less than $200, and that's securing my home network, which has, you know, somewhat trusted devices, but have zero security on them. You know, my kids have devices over my left shoulder that never had security built in. How does that affect my corporate systems that I'm working with here? And from our perspective, you know, InfoBlocks manages on-premise and the virtual aspects of DNS, DHCP, and IP address management combined with the threat intel. But because we also manage the DNS, we have the ability to implement that as a control point. And a lot of organizations that we come across aren't utilizing that for anything other than a service availability feature. And so we actually had that as a stopping point for all DNS traffic. And there was an FCW interview about a month ago, and the NSA cybersecurity director said, and I quote, "Secure DNS can reduce malware attacks by 92% on a given network." If you know that DNS is a gap and all you're doing is logging it or looking at it after the fact and not using that as a control point to stop, this is a gaping hole in your network. And if you can prevent 92% of attacks just within that one control point, why aren't you doing something about it? And that's the biggest question that I'm asking CISOs around the agencies that we support is, how do, you know, if you know that you could do something, if you know that you can, you know, change the lock on this door and make it harder to tamper with, you can secure that soft point. Why are you not doing it?
Right, put that lock on the door, take that off the table, right? Again, tamp that down and get you to a point where you can do some of this threat hunting type activity that Shane, you were talking about. So I know, Shane, over at Citizen and Immigration Services, there's a lot of activity going on over there, a lot of different priorities, things that you're trying to do to enable, you know, the workforce in this sort of remote environment, you know, operating environment. What priorities do you have in your job jar these days?
Yeah, our USCIS was not satisfied by a single cloud. We wanted to do multi-cloud. So one of the big initiatives we're pushing is to go multi-cloud. What does that mean from a system side? That means microservices and serverless deployments and the like, and the technologies around that. When you start looking at it from a security perspective, you've actually fundamentally changed what a system looks like. Actually, in so many ways, it doesn't even meet the definition under FISMA of what a system is. So we have to begin re-looking at how we authorize that, how we manage that, and how, more importantly, how we secure that. We're currently utilizing 3 different cloud providers and beginning our deployments across those clouds. So we have to be able to secure all that, and that's where when I began my conversation, I talked about the importance of respecting the chaos. And that means having a very fluid, very nimble, security program that can pivot. So when COVID hit, one of the things we had to do was pivot and begin dealing with a workforce that on any given day was 5,000 teleworkers going to something, north of 20,000. What is the impact for an agency like us that requires in-person interviews, requires the ability to meet with the public? How do we handle that? So they quickly had to deploy interviewing technology that allows us to still interview people, but not do it face-to-face. That's a big lift. And not only that, they wanted to incorporate it. It wasn't enough just to have a webcam set up that does point to point. No, they have to have it all integrated into the systems so that they can sign and capture video and all these things. Our development teams were able to do that and do it quickly. And then the next piece, of course, is all the security wrapping around that. And so how do we manage all that? And so our focus has been having a security program that can pivot like that and move and function kind of like the agile development teams do. And in many ways we are. So, the focus for us is on that automation and on making sure that the tools that we have in place are not focused on the past, but more focused on what's coming up next. And so everything we do now is sort of focused on, hey, next generation, next this, next that, and never being satisfied with the status quo. Because I think that's sort of the trap that a lot of organizations, especially on the security side, we kind of get caught up in. That's sort of that compliance mindset. It's like, oh, look, I've got green across my scorecard. I'm good. No, I'm not good. Multi-cloud is a challenge. It doesn't add to your security. It actually makes security more challenging and more interesting. But at the same time, it offers some really interesting, new ways of doing things. Under the ATO system we're looking at doing, we're going to begin ATOing the pipelines that are developed in. Anything generated out of that pipeline falls under that ATO boundary. What does that mean? ATO in 24 hours. Not a problem.
Fantastic. That dream of ATO in a day is gonna be here at some point. I would imagine that. Yeah, it's interesting that not only are you doing the telework for the employees, you're actually trying to do this telework, sort of remote interviewing. I'm sure that that wrist posture is interesting. And look, all of you have to learn how to play pickup basketball in this environment, right? Yeah, you had a plan, you had a strategy, the world changed, and you've got to adjust accordingly. John, I would imagine over at BMC, you've got a lot of priorities. You're seeing a lot of priorities being imposed on you to solve or help solve for these departments and agencies. Tell us about those.
Yeah, well, obviously a lot of the agencies are at various stages, whether it's transformation or modernization efforts that include, retirement or modernization of legacy technologies. Apart from the scanning, which is something we integrate with, and we spent a lot of time with the other panelists talking about, automation and visibility so that decision makers can really get to the point where they're making decisions, right? We provide a lot of the underpinning technology stack to identify assets, analyze, assess operational risk, and then really restore or modify, governance, right? So, really where our focus is right now is to really further expand our technology around the automation and dashboarding console, which really the goal there is providing a single view of remediation opportunities, blind spot detection, and risk and impact analysis, so that those decisions can be made, which is something that I think plagues a lot of agencies today is, something goes down or there's an outage or those kind of things. A lot of folks get in the room and it's kind of pointing fingers at one another. What'd you change? So, as I mentioned, a lot of our customers are going through various stages of transformational efforts. We're talking about multi-cloud or hybrid cloud strategies, which does provide certainly agility efforts that didn't exist today, but balancing that agility with run and reinvent and a secure focus is really where a lot of our value realization efforts are, and doing that in a very consistent and methodical way.
That balance, that delicate balance is really important from just a perspective. Again, if I'm looking at my risk posture, I've got to be able to balance these different activities, make the right choices. All right, well, we're going to roll over to a question I love to ask, which is lessons learned. And that's lessons learned on sort of the positive, or lessons learned on if I could do it over again. And Wanda, let's start with you. I'm sure there's a lot of activity that you'd like to, lessons learned that you'd like to communicate and share with our audience. Tell us about a few of them.
Oh, absolutely. What we've learned based on this pandemic, that we can pivot and we can pivot fast. We learned that we're very resilient and that we're able to make changes even to policy to facilitate a telework environment. The mission doesn't stop because of the environment. And so we're able to do that. And that, we found that policies were not as limiting as we thought they were. We've also found that, they were old and outdated. And so we went and looked at policies, made changes. We incorporated new techniques and tools to be able to move fast and forward. We understand that challenges happen. Cybersecurity is something that has to be done and not done at the end. And so some of the lessons learned is we have to collaborate. We have to be able to work with our industry partners as well as our sister services. And so part of the lessons learned is we can do it. We just need to figure out how to do it and do it smartly. Resources are limited. And so by using automation, collaboration, we know that we can continue to move forward, and cybersecurity is a key enabler in the entire process.
Right. Good catch on that policy one, right? As you're sort of breaking new ground here in this new environment, all of a sudden you realize the policies perhaps haven't kept up with them and you have to refresh them. Well, we're going to take a short break and we'll be right back. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Network.